Table of Nations. And I want to start right off with a hillbilly holler out to my sister in Sweden, Sister Elizabeth. I love Sister Elizabeth and want to give her a shout out. Hillbilly holler. Of course, you know those Swedes, they live in the hills. They know all about being hillbillies. We're going to jump right in and finish this study. Got a lot of stuff to cover. And just want to say I got one of my favorite shirts on right now. This, you know, you just have some favorite shirts. This thing, I don't know how old it is. It's getting a little worn, but I hope it lasts to the rapture. It's one of my favorite shirts. I know it's not a Hawaiian print, and that upsets some of you, but you know, I have an eclectic taste. I pretty much wear anything that I can get cheap that fits me. So let's get into the study. Our coverage of the Table of Nations, chapter 10. This should be an introduction. I don't want you to think that we're not going in deep here. But the problem I just want to warn you about is when you jump in deep into things like this, you can also get into a lot of garbage. People trying to claim all these racial theories and stuff like that. So be very careful if you continue your studies, and of course you should continue your studies in these genealogies, but really the Bible's all you need, but there's a lot of good historical information. There's a lot of good stuff out there by Bible believers, so just be careful. The other day I found, for example, a real interesting fact that the Greek people in their ancient writings that we have, they refer to themselves as sons of Javan, which would be one of Japheth's sons. And they also refer to themselves as the son of Japhethos, which is a reference to Japheth. So that's all interesting information, but you just got to be careful where you get it. And so let's open the word of prayer. And Father, I ask that you help us as we study, but you open our eyes to what your word has, that I thank you for the information, of course, you give me that I can share with these folks. But we also pray for those who continue their studies, that you'll keep them safe from the evil one and keep them away from heretics and liars, or just those who are misdirected and misinformed who give us bad information. Lord, help us to stay on the narrow path of truth and to make your word our final authority and never, never stray from what your book tells us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we've covered the sons of Japheth and the sons of Ham. Now let's get into the sons of Shem. And where's my Bible? Got to have my Bible here in my super giant print leather calfskin beautiful Bible from Local Church Bible Publishers. I got this thing here. This Bible would have cost me a couple $100. I'm not kidding you, because it's super giant print and calfskin, just gorgeous. Just look at that thing, beautiful. That would have cost me, I'm not kidding you, a couple $100 in a Christian bookstore, and I got it for about $55 plus shipping. And I didn't, you know, I had somebody actually gave me money to help me buy. I didn't ask for it, but they heard me say I had to find a better Bible, or a Bible with bigger print. And so anyway, the Lord's good; He provides. So let's get into this. My King James Bible from localchurchbiblepublishers.com, I think, is their website. And we begin in verse 21. Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber. You got to circle that name, get to know it. The brother of Japheth, the elder, even to him were children born. So he says, unto Shem, who is the father of Eber, but he says all the children of Eber. Why? Well, because Eber became, the descendants of Eber became known as Hebrews. And for years I'd studied and never come across any information on that. And now I see it all the time. People are very confident that's the truth. And so the children of Eber, who are the children of Shem, would become known as Hebrews. And we, just as a note as we get into this is the line of Shem. And Shem is the one who will bring forth the Messiah. It's through his line, his lineage. But then there's others that break off, other nations that have nothing to do with that. So we need to familiarize ourselves with a couple of genealogies as we read through the Old Testament over in the New Testament. Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 18 is the lineage or genealogy that leads to Joseph. And that one only goes from Abraham to Joseph. It sort of assumes that the reader is going to understand that Abraham came from this line that we actually see laid out here and further in the Old Testament from Shem, well, actually all the way back from Adam through Noah and Shem, all the way up through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons, the patriarchs that became Israel. But over in Luke 3, beginning of verse 23 to the end of the chapter, is the lineage of Mary, and it has her dad, Heli, talked about, referred to as Joseph being the son of Heli, but it's actually Mary's line, and that's, that seems strange to Americans or Europeans or whoever, and so, the skeptics are always looking for a reason not to believe the Bible, so they read that and they say, oh, this is a contradiction. If you read Matthew 1 and you read Luke 3, they don't match. Duh. Because one is of Joseph's lineage in Matthew 1, the other in Luke 3 is of Mary. And if you look through that line, you'll see where the big split comes, is that David, after David, it's Solomon in Matthew 1. Because it follows the kingly lineage, and when Jesus is adopted by Joseph, he has the legal right as the heir to assume the throne of David. But in Luke, it goes from David through Nathan. And you say, why is that? Well, we don't have time to get into all the details, but that's where this genealogy stuff gets real interesting. Because later on, there's this creep, this pagan named Jeconiah, who sits on the throne. And that's the line from which Joseph came. But God said, after Jeconiah, when Babylon came down and sacked the place, your seed will not sit on the throne. He stopped calling him Jeconiah because the Jah meant God, and so he had his name, God's name attached to his name as Jeconiah, and from that point on he just called him Coniah. And the prophecy is fulfilled when Jesus Christ becomes King of Israel, King of the Jews, and he in the future will reign from the literal throne of David in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. But through Mary, he is not from Solomon and Coniah or Jeconiah. He is from Nathan. And so you just go read that, and you'll see all that for yourself. But that's what these genealogies represent. That's why they're so important for us to read carefully. And so you see Shem, who's the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth. Now, I just want to point this out. Another interesting thing about this verse 21, is that it says he's the brother of Japheth, the elder. That means Japheth was the oldest. And here's an example of God not using the firstborn for his blessing. Of course, that happened with Cain and Abel being killed, and then Seth is the one who's chosen of God and blessed. But I'd list a few other examples. Of course, Jacob and Esau. Judah, he's not the firstborn, and yet that's who the line of the tribe of Judah, the Messiah, comes through Judah. Also, Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. Remember, Jacob switched his hands and blessed the younger above the elder. And King David, the youngest of 7 sons, is chosen as king. And then from his seed comes the Messiah. Just interesting, very interesting stuff. Verse 22 says, the children of Shem, Elam, and Asher, and Arphaxad, and Lud, and Aram. Now, the identification of Arphaxad is important there in Luke 3:36, and that's really the gist of it. That you're identifying, as you read through this, you can see the first descendants of Shem who end up in the genealogy of Luke 3, but there's something we're going to come back to in just a minute about that. Let's keep reading. Verse 23 says, "And the children of Aram," and of course, when you look at these, the children of Shem, outside of Arphaxad, from this point, we're not real concerned. It's interesting, it's important as far as understanding the Bible. You see these people pop up here and there, but the lineage of Jesus comes through Arphaxad. And verse 23 says, "And the children of Aram, Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash." And of course, Mash had a TV program named about him later, and I love the theme song. Da, 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 da. It's actually not a great show, and the movie isn't a very family-oriented movie, and so I'm going to get email about that. But I thought it was funny. Anyway, the children of Aram include Uz, which is not a reference to the Wizard of Uz. That's Oz. And by the way, despite the Wiz and all these goofy renditions, the Wizard of Oz is about the Federal Reserve. Look it up. Interesting. That's thrown in for free. It has nothing to do with this study. But Uz is where Job lived, the land of Uz. So, and Job was an Edomite, and we're going to see later in Genesis that he might have been considered an Edomite king. Ain't that something? We'll come back to that later. Verse 24 now says, and Arphaxad. Now this is back on the line where we want to focus on. And Arphaxad begat Selah, and Selah begat Eber. Now let's put the brakes on. Throw it in park and throw on the emergency brake for just a second. We're going to sit here for a minute, because this is where a lot of skeptics come and say there's an error in the Bible. And they get that because when you go back to Luke 3, as I've encouraged you to do, you'll see that there's someone missing from this account that is added by Luke in Luke 3. And in Luke 3, we're told that between Arphaxad and Selah was this Canaan, spelled Canain, not the son of Ham. This is a different one. And of course, like any family, they repeat and use names over and over through these genealogies, and that's why it's important for you to grasp who we're talking about and get an idea of who's where and where names are repeated, and that helps just clear up the confusion. And God just made the Bible so that if you study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. If you want work, man, that's not study. Study is work, but it's the old, the Jewish proverb says, "Blessed is the man whose work is his play." And so hopefully most all of you understand what I say when I tell you that the Bible study is work, but it's great fun. And if you will go into the genealogies and get to know these people, you won't be confused when you see names used more than once. There's more than one Enos, for example. And I'm not going to try to name all the names off the top of my head, because another thing is, this isn't about your ability to recall everything. And there's times like when I'm teaching, I just can't recall things. There's times where I've read something just a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, and someone will bring it up and I'll be like, "Oh, I just read that. Oh, I can't think about," this isn't about us. It isn't about us being able to impress ourselves or impress other people. It's about God and about His Word. And if you can't recall something, it must not have been that big of a deal, or God would have given you the recall. But it also, means we got to keep in this book. You should read through this book and start all over and read through it again. The other day, had a lady try to tell me that the Jews of today are not the real Israel and all that stuff. And I told her that that was a lie, and I gave her a couple of links where she could see the information. We've done a rebuttal of Stephen Anderson's Marching to Zion. We call it Marching to Zion with Lies. I gave her links so she could watch it, and actually she seems to be coming around. Pray for her. God, you don't need to know her name. God knows who you're praying for when you pray for that lady who's wrong on Israel that Pastor Greg was talking to. But it was just childish But you see this stuff all the time. Her response was, she said, "Trust me, Pastor, I read through the whole Bible cover to cover, and I can tell you that what I'm saying is true." It's like talking to an infant, spiritually speaking. And I just respond, I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "I'm not bragging, but I've read through the Bible several times a year since 1990. I don't count. I haven't tried to keep count because it gets into a pride issue. And the point isn't how many times you've read through it or whether you read through it one whole time. The point is that you study to show yourself approved unto God and that you rightly divide the word of truth." Now, you may not have automatic recall and be able to quote everything, and I have trouble remembering the names of the 12 patriarchs a lot of times, and I usually am pretty good with the books of the Bible and the 12 apostles, some of those things, but there are times where I forget, even the 10 commandments, I get them out of order every once in a while. I can name all 10, but I don't always get them in the right order. What's that mean? Nothing. Just means my brain is mush. It means one of these days I need that glorified brain that we're all going to get. So I want to just be an encouragement to you. Don't think that there's something wrong with you because you don't have automatic recall. But as you compare these genealogies, you see that, or if you don't see it and you talk to atheists and agnostics enough, it's a place where they're going to claim that there is an error. And I want to do something I haven't done before, I don't do very often, but I just want to read a little bit from a book called Errors in the King James Bible by Dr. Peter S. Ruckman. Now again, some of you are going to say, he's a Ruckmanite. I'm not a Ruckmanite. And there's places where I disagree with Dr. Ruckman. I'm going to be doing a study showing that I don't agree with him on the book of Revelation not being chronological. I believe it is chronological. And there are other things I disagree with Peter Ruckman on. And I can read from Peter Ruckman's book just as shortly as I can read from J. Vernon McGee or someone else, Dave Hunt or who else I quote. I quote that Joey Faust. I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff. It just, don't be childish. I'm reading something from this book that's accurate. It doesn't mean I think everything this guy teaches is 100% true. Okay? Grow up. And now let's read. Page 36, regarding this text, says the problem here is why Luke has added, that's in italics, the name of one man to the genealogy, Canaan, when Moses did not write his name down in Genesis. Arphaxad begets Selah, and that's spelled differently in Luke, not Canaan, according to Luke 3:36. Now listen to this. To reconcile this apparent contradiction, Origen and his little buddies at the world's most unusual university in Alexandria, Egypt, added the name Canaan to Genesis when they wrote the LXS, the Septuagint, about 150 to 300 years after Luke wrote Luke 3. This was to make the suckers at Tennessee Temple, which is now defunct, Princeton, which is apostate, Dallas Theological Seminary, and Lynchburg, which is, what is the name of that? Liberty University, Pensacola Christian College, Chicago University, and Bob Jones University, think that Luke accepted a Greek Septuagint instead of the Hebrew text of Genesis. That the suckers took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Now, what all that means is the Septuagint was written after the birth of Christ. It was not a pre-Jesus, pre-BC writing. The Septuagint that we have today is nothing but Vaticanus. In the Codex Vaticanus, the entire Old and New Testament is in classical Greek. If there was a Septuagint, it would have not been written in classical Greek. And number two, you can't find a copy of it that predates the time of Christ. And I'm trying to look in here. He actually makes reference to that at some point. So let's continue reading. Canaan is the 13th from Adam in the Messianic line, as Nimrod is the 13th from Adam in Ham's line. But if you set about to prove that one list is in error because of an omission or the other list is in error because of an addition, you will have to prove a number of other things first. Number one, you have to prove that the expression so-and-so was of so-and-so has to be direct father and son relationship. In other words, there's times in the genealogies where such and such is of such and such, but it's a grandchild or a great-grandchild. And that's also in Luke 3:36. The words "the son" are in italics when it says "and the son of Heli." In the context, it was a son-in-law. Joseph was the son of Heli, but it was a son-in-law. Canaan could have married one of Arphaxad's daughters and been included in the list. We don't know. Number two, you will have to prove that if these italics are to be retained, that a son has to be a direct son and not a grandson, and this will be extremely difficult in view of the fact that in Matthew 1:8, Joram begat Uzziah, and Uzziah is Joram's great-grandson. Again, that happens in these genealogies, and it's not a big deal unless you're a skeptic looking for a reason not to believe the Bible, because it was a typical practice of that day. Number three, you must prove that Moses, by an omission, contradicted Luke, which will be very difficult in view of the fact that Mark omitted a blind man in Mark 10:46, who is mentioned in Matthew 20:30, and yet neither account contradicts the other, any more than the accounts found in Mark 5:1 through 14 compare with Matthew 8:28. In other words, the fact that there are differences doesn't mean it's a contradiction. You have to look. A contradiction means one thing says the opposite of the other, and that's not the case here. We just simply have a bit of information in Luke 3, Canaan, who isn't listed here. That doesn't make it a contradiction. Doesn't make it an error. And he goes on to describe the real deal with these guys and why they're trying to make you think that there's an error here. And number one, there's a lot of professing Christians who will tell you that nonsense, and the reason they do it is because they want you to think they are the authority. They want you to go to them for authority. They don't want you to just go to the Word of God and believe it. Then, of course, the skeptics and other people want to rob you of your faith in the Word of God so that you'll be upset and distraught and discouraged and then quit. And folks, if you'll quit over something that easy, God help you. You were standing on sand to begin with. I'm just here to tell you. Some of you may not think this is a good attitude, but it's my attitude. I couldn't give a flip what you in this book and claim error and contradiction. I have tried it and tested it for 25 years, and I am to the point where I know there's no error in here. I just know one thing, that if I'm ever stumped on something about this book, the answer is out there. The truth is out there, as Mulder would say. And the truth, just because it's not in my noggin, doesn't mean it's not out there, or doesn't mean that this isn't true. In other words, if there seems to be a contradiction in this book, it just means I lack information. That's it. I mean, I remember when I first got saved and someone said, well, who did Cain marry? Boy, that threw me for a loop. I was like, what? What? Well, he married his sister. Well, that's sick. That's gross. Well, I'm glad you think so, and it's good that I thought so. We shouldn't be marrying our sisters. But back then, it was a different world. And when the sister and brother married, they didn't have offspring with all kinds of deformities and mental issues and psychotic, as we'd call it. So it's a whole different situation. And when I lacked information, I was a little troubled. I even prayed, Lord, this is bad. I mean, now I look back and it's just funny because it's silly. But trust me, if someone ever shows you something that they claim is an error in this book, don't let it cost you a night's sleep. Trust the Lord, pray about it, talk to someone like me. I'm not saying I'm not an authority, but you can feel free, send me an email or whatever, and get yourself a book. Get a book like this. If somebody who studied the Bible for half a century and put out a book about it, the errors in the King James Bible, he's got all this stuff cataloged for you. Who cares how you come up with the information? We're after the truth. You get it from a book. You know, a lot of these cult leaders like Mike Hoggard tell you, oh, don't read books by other men, just read the Bible. Meanwhile, they've got a whole library where they've been reading books by other men. That's foolishness. The book of Proverbs says there's wisdom in a multitude of counsel. And today you can get that counsel in paperback. Do it. All right, so let's pick up with the next verse there in verse 25. And unto Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now, we don't have time to dwell on this, but Peleg is referred to as Phalec, Phalec, in Luke 3. And this thing, in his days, was the earth divided. Some people might park here and make a big deal about it, but there are two options, and I'm not dogmatic about which one's right because I don't know. I'm not here to tell you I know everything. I'm just here to teach the Bible. And it could be a reference to Babel, the earth being divided, meaning that it was divided by nations. The other option is that there was this Pangea, one big continent, and at this point is when you get North America, South America, Australia, Africa, Eurasia, and all that. Scientifically, that's a little hard to swallow for a lot of people. I could believe it. But then again, it could be Babel. It's not a big deal. The problem isn't, there's nothing wrong with the text, and the fact that we don't know which it is has no real consequence. So I'm not going to make a big deal about it at this point. So let's continue, verse 26. And Joktan begat Almadad, and Sheleph, and Hazar-Mavath, and Jerah. Now, we're into the lineage of Joktan. Now, Joktan is not of the Messianic lineage, but it's very interesting. Look at the rest of these names in verse 27. And Hadoram, and Uzal, and Diklah, verse 28. And Obal, and Abimael, and Sheba, verse 29. And Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. Now, there's some interesting stuff about this. But number one, the big thing I want you to get, we're going to be crunching on time here, but the big thing is Joktan is believed to be the father of the Chinese and Oriental people. And from the studies I've done and reading I've done, I'm pretty convinced. And what I think is kind of funny, if you think about it, look at that name, Joktan. Let's just throw in some of these names and mix them with some Chinese names. There's Joktan, Mi Wu, Almodad, Lin Shang, Shig Lef, Sally Tang, Jera, Fu Chang, Obal, Chin Li, Sheba, Xin Lu, and so forth. Now, some of you couldn't tell the difference. About every other one of those was from the Bible, and then every other one was from just, Chinese menu. And if you're Chinese, please don't be offended. I make jokes about Chinese hillbillies, which I am. I have a little Cherokee in me. I make Native American jokes. Have a sense of humor. But as funny as that was or was not, I think etymology, language and etymology has a lot to do with figuring out who these people are. So take it for what it's worth. Verse 30 then says, and their dwelling was from Mesha, as thou goest unto Sephar, a mount of the east. Now, Mesha is in Iran, and they went past Sephar, believed to be mountains in China and Tibet. So I rest my case. So let's close out. Not much needs to be said here. Verses 31, 32. These are the sons of Shem, after their families, after their tongues, in their lands, after their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations. And by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood, which relates back to the discussion with Peleg. We'll pick up right there and have more to say about this in our next study.
For solid King James Bible preaching and teaching, along with the encouragement of the Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, tune in to our internet radio station, available every day, 24 hours a day, at bbfohioradio.com. Join listeners from over 150 nations, all 50 U.S. states, and other U.S. territories who are tuning in and receiving free Bible teaching at bbfohioradio.com.